Okay, and the topic for my second talk will be the history of Swedish avalanche education. And I think there are some lessons to be learned from the Swedish experience that I hope that you can bring into your common project, so you don't have to make all the mistakes that the Swedes have done. I will talk about three different time periods. The first is to 2003, and then a 10-year period from 2003 to 2013, and the last 2 years. So I will start with the old history from 1943 to 2003. And what I think you should notice is how the responsibility for the avalanche questions in Sweden have jumped between different organizations during the years. So almost every organization in Sweden has in some time period been responsible for avalanche education. And if that is a good thing or not, I let you judge. But first was actually the Swedish Tourist Association, which started the first avalanche courses in 1943. They also wrote a book, which is roughly the same content as any avalanche book of today. The Swedish Tourist Association, it's a hard word, were also a founding member of what it was called the Avalanche Committee. And the Avalanche Committee is quite similar to what we today would call an EU project. And this is from the first avalanche course that was held in Abisko in Sweden, 1943, by the Avalanche Committee. And those of you who read Swedish, you see that it's more or less the same avalanche course content as today. And since I'm a researcher in risk psychology, I think it's quite interesting to see that they were touching at least human factors in the 1940s as well. The Avalanche Committee wrote also a small booklet that was handed out to the tourists in the mountain about avalanches and how to avoid them. The next organization in Sweden to take the lead in avalanches was the Swedish Meteorological and Hydraulical Institute, the SMHI. And what I can see from Finland, I can see that the FMI have had a leading role, at least in avalanche forecasting, in avalanche communication. So it's similar. The SMHI also proposed a warning service in 1959 in Sweden. Did a small calculation of it. It should, since Swedes like to investigate and never decide, so it would take another 60 years before this was finally implemented. So the Avalanche Committee continued during the 60s and the beginning of the 70s. A little better graphics, but it's the same content. During the 60s and the 70s, the Swedish police got involved in this because the police was, in some sense, responsible for the public. So now the police departments, at that time there were no common department in Sweden, so it was the different police areas that had this responsibility. So this is an early avalanche warning from the 60s, and it's the police that are responsible. And in 1973, a Swede called Magnus Granhed formed the company Rekko, who is a portable radar device. And since he was a Swede, this company came to influence the Swedish education for a very, very long time. And so that's why I'm noting that that Rekko has played a very, very large part of Swedish avalanche education, for bad and for good. The Swedish Transport Administration started in the 1970s, and they are still a very large player in Sweden, a large stakeholder. They have had lots of avalanche problems for the railroad and the European highway in Abisko, so they are still a large stakeholder, and they have been for at least 40 years. Since Swedes like to discuss, so we started early with our Avalanche Congress. It was in 1980, the first Congress, and the organization committee, they brought in experts from the USA. USA was the lead nation in Sweden, both on the ski patrol community and also in the avalanche community. So lots of the Swedish early ski patrollers, they went to North America and they brought back the knowledge. So there was an early USA connection in Sweden. In 1983, a new organization took the lead, and that was actually the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency, who suddenly got the mountain safety question on its table. So the government decided that the Swedish EPA should be responsible for all mountain safety in Sweden, and that includes avalanches. And the Swedish EPA started with an avalanche forecasting program. So they started with avalanche observer courses. And those of you who have been in the business for a while, you can identify the round penometer where you can measure the stratigraphy of the snowpack. So this is very much into the snow mechanical era. Everyone thought that you could predict the avalanches by doing this probing. And now it has re-emerged as a gimmick called Avatech. Have you heard about it? No. 40 years later, so the history goes round and round like this. And actually the Swedish EPA also were responsible for the ski areas. So this is a book that defined the rules how ski areas should be organized in Sweden. And this book were the foundation for the rules that are still used in Sweden. They also made this more course literature that is called Skiing and Avalanches. And in this booklet there was also a crystal card. So you could, when you were out off-piste skiing, you could take up your crystal card and look at the crystals and make your decisions concerning the snow crystals. So this is still in the snow mechanical era, if we can call it that. Then they wrote a book about avalanche control in 1984, how to control avalanches with explosives. And since 1984, Sweden has had a long tradition of avalanche control. We learned to control avalanches before we learned how they worked. So that is also for good and for bad, but we started early with this explosive work. Then a new organization emerged, the Ski Safety Council, that developed this booklet, and in the late 80s they also produced a film that followed this booklet, Stay Alive This Winter. But the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency, they didn't want to be second, so they launched a new book in 1988 that was about avalanche forecasting in Sweden. So you can see how fragmented the Swedish community is. Lots of organizations, lots of initiatives, but no collaboration. So I think that is a very good lesson to be for the Finnish community because if the Swedes had been organized from the 1940s, we shouldn't have been where we are today, of course, because we could have focused on other things. In 1990, the first bigger education program started with in Åre in Sweden with ski teachers that wanted to ski off-piste. They also looked at the new Avalanche danger scale that was newly developed in Europe. They also started to use this survival curve that you probably all have seen before. And that was also the transition to the new organization that were interested in taking the lead. And that was the Swedish Ski Area Association. So now SLAW emerged and said that avalanches belong to us. And they also introduced this avalanche danger scale. And it's totally based on weather. It's very interesting that SLAW invented their own danger scale. They didn't look at the European danger scale that was used in Europe. They invented their own. So you see it's still this fragmented community. Well, the Ski Safety Council, they got back, so they remade this education program, this booklet and this film. And the Swedish Ski Area Association continued, so they started to develop quite a large course curriculum. And this is from the first step 1 course. And then they advanced, so they introduced up to, I think it's 3 levels of avalanche courses. And I mentioned that Sweden has been influenced by RECO, and this generation of courses were very much focused on rescue. Almost nothing about terrain, nothing about human factors. It was almost 90% rescue, and that is a dead end to enter. And that is a very warning example in Sweden that you shouldn't confuse avalanche education with avalanche rescue education. And that's what was happening in Sweden. So a generation of Swedes were taught rescue, but they didn't learn how to read terrain or make decisions and all of those essential things. In a short, the courses were longer, and that meant more rescue and more of snow crystals and more of weather. And what should be said here that around this time internationally, avalanche education were leaving the snow crystals and moving into what is called the human factor. But in Sweden we kept on doing rescue drills, rescue courses, rescue organization, and so on. And this area ended with the comeback of the Swedish EPA. The Swedish Environmental Protection Agency had been away 10 years, but now they wanted a part of it, so they came with this book, Avalanches, and its Mountain Safety Council. And in 2001, a new player entered or an old play maybe, that was the Swedish Armed Forces that wrote their own book. They started their own education system. And they also started with avalanche forecasts in Sweden in 2001. To that I want to say that today the Swedish Armed Forces is actually leading in Sweden. That is the leading organization in avalanche education in Sweden, but they are now working in the Swedish system. Before they worked outside the Swedish system. Okay, that was the first years. The next years, the business or the industry was quite tired of all these different organizations having different education system, having different views on how to do this. So in 2003, there was the first joint project. I guess that's where you all are now in this room. You have gathered all the different organizations, and I understand from what I hear that you're quite focused on finding a common solution. And this was after 60 years in Sweden. It took us 60 years to realize that we should cooperate and we should find a common solution. So then we in 2003, all these different major stakeholders gathered and tried to seek a common strategy. How should avalanche education and avalanche work look in Sweden? And then the common project chose one principle to work as organization, the principle for the Swedish avalanche work. And that was the Swedish Ski Area Association. But it should be noted that it's not the Swedish Ski Area organization didn't have their own agenda. It was acting on behalf of the Swedish community. And then a new common danger scale was introduced for the different organizations and for Sweden. And about this time, Sweden began to get more international inputs. The Swedish Mountain Guide Association had grown larger. There were lots of influence from Swedish mountain guides who were working internationally. The Swedish Armed Forces were working internationally. They had the military mountain guides coming back to Sweden. And also the international community started with, like this Swiss avalanche instructor who made a profession to teach in other countries. And this was the start of a more international input. And that was very good for Sweden to learn that there are people in the countries who have been doing this for a very, very long time. So you shouldn't like invent the wheel one more time. You should actually just look at other countries and do what they do. So this was the conclusion from this early years, that it should be based on international standards. It should be designed so all stakeholders and organizations should accept the content and structure, and same basis and so on. And also some demands that was internationally correlated, that the instructors should have proven their ability, and they should also do a formal instructor training. And it should be offered to both professional and recreational and so on. And Sweden chose the North American tradition, and there was a lot of debate in Sweden at that time, because the Swedish Armed Forces, they had chosen the European way of looking at, especially the avalanche danger scale, how it is formulated and how you should use it. And why did Sweden choose the North American tradition? Well, Sweden has a large mountain region, no people living in it, population density. Sweden weren't that keen of centralized thinking. There were more of a decentralized thinking in Sweden. The education culture were almost the same in Sweden. We had the ski patrol culture of ski patrollers coming to one place, doing one course, and then working separately. And also the resolution of avalanche forecasts. This is a debate that is still ongoing in Norway, by the way, so the choice between European and North America is still heavily debated, especially in Norway. One of the key success of the Swedish restart was that it should be based on a franchise system. So the principal organization should not do courses by itself. It should just organize it. It should quality assurance of curriculums and educate instructors and so on. But the courses should be done by the industry itself. And how to keep up this discussion you are having here? Well, in Sweden there was every year there was some what is called an Avalanche forum, where everyone who worked as an instructor or was a stakeholder in the business attended. So there was some kind of continuous discussion about courses and how they should be taught. And the continuous development of courses is roughly this way. There was a course curriculum made by the SLAU, the Ski Area Association, and then there was decided that now it was the time to review it. Then the instructors came with feedback from the industry. You should do this, and you should be doing that. And then you had research and you had guidelines. And for example, the introduction of the V-shaped conveyor belt when you dig avalanche victims, for example, is research. And it soon became a guideline and it was implemented in the courses, and a new version emerged from that, and so on. This thinking of continuous development have been a success in Sweden. And the franchise system expanded, and it was up to, I think, you can see it's roughly 8-9 courses. If you look at the total volume, there is this is avalanche courses in Sweden. The red line is the 3-day course, and the yellow is the 6-day course. When the introduction of the franchise system was here in 2004, you can see a steep increase in avalanche courses. Before that, it was an organization that taught the courses, and after that, it was a franchise system where entrepreneurs taught courses. And the most successful entrepreneur we have in Sweden, Mårtenson, will talk later, and how to work inside this system. And this was a distribution of courses in Sweden. As you can see, there are lots of different companies, and you can see let's see up here, this is the principal organization. It's only accounted for 3% of avalanche courses in Sweden, so 97% of the courses were in this franchise system. It came a new avalanche book, the Swedish Mountain Safety Council and the Swedish Ski Area Association in 2009. And it also came a second book that was written by Mårten, who will come later. But the interesting thing here is you have the state, the government doing one book, and you have the commercial side doing another book. So here I think this is a good example where Sweden were and became in this part. You have the commercial side and you have the government side working together in some kind of collaboration. So in the same year, two different books came, and one was from a commercial side and one was from the government. The Swedish Environmental Protection Agency, they started with avalanche forecast in 2011 and 2012. And this will eventually lead to that the Swedish EPA will take the leading role. They wrote a couple of reports about this. Avalanche forecasts. The Swedish Ski Area Association made a very important decision in 2012. They said that to work with avalanches in a ski area, you had to have a certain level of education, and that was called the avalanche technician, and that meant that all the avalanche work or decisions in the ski area was qualified according to this education system. The Swedish EPA also started with an avalanche terrain exposure scale in 2013 and up to today, where all the Swedish mountain region were classified according to this Canadian classification. And they also invested in a common avalanche web, where all information in Sweden are collected, where all the media goes to find information, where you can download illustrations for the TV and newspapers and so on. And the Swedish EPA also issued a new official education film. And according to the strategy not to invent the wheel by itself, the Swedish EPA just translated the Canadian film, The Fine Line, which is now the official education film in Sweden. And then a new danger scale. You can see we Swedes, we love this danger scale. We keep remaking it all the time. And the Swedish EPA went into these human factors and looked on how to prevent accidents. And then it was time for the next Avalanche Congress in 2013. And now, as you can see, the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency became the new principal for the Swedish avalanche courses. And they should also investigate the possibilities of a Swedish avalanche forecast service. And the last two winters has been a transition winters in Sweden, where the old slough system has been used, unchanged. And that comes to the last 2 years that have been, as I said, the transition years. There have been lots of investigations in Sweden. We want to really discuss everything before we can make any decisions. So me and a colleague, we wrote this report about, is there a need in Sweden for avalanche education and forecasting? Yes. There was a governmental assignment, and now in 2 weeks, finally, Sweden has reached the goal that more or less the whole industry are assembled into one education system. The reviewers are at the moment posting their reviews to the Swedish EPA. On the Congress that will be in 2 weeks in autumn, there will be a presentation of a national avalanche forecast service. There will be a national avalanche course program, and it also has a new name. So in Sweden, the avalanche education now is called SVELAB, Swedish Avalanche Education, and it consists of these courses, As you can see, there are 2 new courses that are aimed directly to the free riders, both on snowmobile and on skis or snowboard. So those courses are completely new. There is a difference between recreational and pro in Sweden, the new system. There are 4 levels, where 2 of the levels are totally Canadian. So the Swedish system is totally integrated with the Canadian Avalanche Association system. And 2 avalanche rescue courses and 1 avalanche instructor course. And all of the reviews, they will be presented in 2 weeks. So I know that some of you are going to attend the Avalanche Congress in Sweden, and there you will see what it took us 70 years to accomplish. Finally, one system, one organization, and also forecast. So. Okay, thank you.